Preachers have to say more than a prayer. This is personal to me. It is communal, and it is personal to many of us who are around my age. I brought my high school yearbook because the first year of court-ordered busing for Oklahoma City was the year before I went to high school. And the school superintendent was Bill Lilland. And Dr. Ballard, there will be someone who will carry around their yearbook and point to your picture someday. But the superintendent of schools asked my principal to be a principal for the first time, a black man to be a principal of a black and white school, 500 white students, 500 black students. It was the most important decision ever made for me. And I am so thankful for myself, for my family, and I want us to invoke not only the spirit of community and the spirit of unity, but also the spirit of those who have gone before us, the spirit of the parents, the spirit of the administrators, the spirit of the teachers who did something that had never been done before. Let us now bow. O Holy One, we belong to one another. We belong to this community. We belong to this past, and we are part of creating this present and this future. Help us now to be open to the spirit of those who have traveled before us, to do new things, to listen to all voices, to respect and hold forth dignity of each person that we listen to, each person that presents. We're so thankful for these who have come, who have prepared and studied, who are professionals in so many ways and have some wisdom and some experience to offer. Help us to be open to the spirit of this place and these people gathered here tonight, to the spirit of unity that unites us all, the spirit and the power of love and truth. May we be so united, so thankful, and generous to one another, that we will hear and know something new, and that we will go from this place and take our truth and our power into this community and help build so that others will stand on our shoulders. For this time together, we do give thanks. We give thanks for the presence of each one here, each story. Thank you, O God. Amen.
Thank you, Twyla, and thank you to the board members of the Dan Allen Center for Social Justice for making this happen. A lot of hard work went into pulling this off, and so thank you for doing that. Welcome. My name's Ed Rossman, and I'm with the Dan Allen Center for Social Justice. And just one sentence background on the center. It promotes social justice through education, outreach, advocacy, and demonstration. And part of its mission is doing things like we're doing here tonight, and looking at the issues of the isolation of poor and ethnic populations in Tulsa, especially in its schools. And the board is interested in having discussion and helping us move forward. 2014 marks the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Topeka Board of Education Supreme Court ruling on racial segregation in public schools. Where are we today in the spirit of that landmark ruling? What is the legacy of the battle to address segregation and social isolation in Tulsa schools and Tulsa in general? What are the current demographic and policy trends leading to Tulsa resegregation, if it is indeed occurring? And is there still any merit to seeking diversity in our schools, in our neighborhoods? We've assembled a distinguished panel of panelists here to discuss the issues tonight. First, we have Dr. David Blatt, and we have Ms. Laura, he's with the Oklahoma Policy Institute, Ms. Laura Ross White of the Community Services Council, Mr. Ed Martinez of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Jocelyn Lee Payne of the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation, and Dr. Keith Ballard of Tulsa Public Schools. In the program, provide you a biography and their backgrounds, and we're very fortunate to have these folks here tonight. Tonight's discussion, what we're going to do is give each panelist 15 minutes to discuss their topic and their area, and we will take questions at the end. What we're going to do, because we have so many people, we're going to pass out cards. We're going to ask you to write the questions down on the cards, and they'll be passed up to me, and we'll give it to the appropriate panelists. We have so many folks here tonight, we're probably not going to be able to address all the questions. We will have time after for informal one-on-one discussions and so forth, and a reward for our long and session. We have cookies and refreshments in the back. Two things I like to, one thing I like to do in a presentation discussion is look at the 2 ups and 2 downs, 2 positive things, 2 negative things, 2 positive things. So what I've done is just wrote down a couple. 2 downs. Yes, ma'am. Oh, all right, I will. Okay, I'll bend over, matter of fact, if that will help. I apologize. Yeah. Okay, 2 downs. 60 years later, we're still here discussing the issue of segregation of poor and ethnic minorities in the Tulsa schools. The other down is, like all complex issues, ignoring them is often the easiest way out, but it's not the best solution. The 2 ups. We got a lot of folks here tonight talking about it. That's wonderful, I think. The other thing is that we have shared values and common purpose in seeking social justice. So with that said, Dr. Blatt, would you begin things?
Thank you very much. Is the microphone on? If it's not, I'm not sure that I know how to turn it on. It is on. Okay, great. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see such a huge crowd here tonight. Nice to see so many familiar faces, maybe even nicer to see so many unfamiliar faces. My name is David Blatt. I'm Executive Director of Oklahoma Policy Institute, and I think I'm here tonight representing 2 important constituencies, professional policy analysts and the underdressed. Not Ed and Keith wore suits, so I didn't have to. I have a couple of handouts which I brought. I understand there's a couple of students here who might be willing to come up and help distribute those. Maybe not.
There. Come on up, guys.
Yeah, don't be shy. Please come up, and there's a couple of handouts. For those not familiar with our organization, Oklahoma Policy Institute is a Tulsa-based state policy think tank. We work on a broad range of state policy issues guided by core commitments for the fair and adequate funding of public services, thank you, and for the expansion of economic opportunity and financial security for all Oklahomans. If you are not connected with our organization, we have sign-up sheets out on this table in the front, and would love for you to sign up for our emails, for our general emails, also for our daily in the news digest. I have written out comments because I was fairly scattered in my thoughts, and as I did a warm-up for this, I was going on and on and on, so I'm going to try to be somewhat disciplined. As well, one of the handouts you're going to get are sources for the data that I'm presenting. There's a lot of numbers here, and I realize people are going to be frantically trying to scribble down all the numbers, so I have scribbled them down for you. All the numbers that I'm going to reference in my comments are compiled onto one spreadsheet along with sources, so don't feel like you need to take detailed notes. In a 1974 paper in the American Journal of Sociology, 2 scholars examined data on segregation in public elementary schools in 60 cities in the 1967 to 68 school year. Somebody's telling me to speak up or into the mic. Okay. 1967-68 school year, which just preceded the start of serious efforts by the federal government to enforce the desegregation of public schools in the South. The researchers used a statistical measure called the dissimilarity index to look at how segregated or integrated the schools were in each city. Roughly speaking, if a school district as a whole had 24% black students and each school had 24% black students, it would receive a dissimilarity index rating of 0. Conversely, if every school had 0% black students or 100% black students, it would have a dissimilarity index of 100, perfect segregation. A score of 70 on the black dissimilarity index, for example, meant that 70% of black students would need to relocate to another school in order for the racial composition of each school to mirror that of the district as a whole. Not surprisingly, the research found most U.S. school systems in the late 1960s were strongly segregated. The average score for the 60 cities was 79. The scores range from a low of 39 in Sacramento, California, to a high of 97 in 2 cities, Oklahoma City and Tulsa. In other words, a mere 4.5 decades ago, Tulsa schools were the most highly segregated in the nation. Clearly, in the efforts that have been made over the past 40 to 45 years to integrate Tulsa schools and equalize opportunity for all students, we've had a lot of ground to make up. So how far have we come? According to data compiled at the website diversitydata.org, and if you're looking for data on ethnic and racial issues, this is an incredible resource. In the 2010 to 2011 school year for the Tulsa Metropolitan Statistical Area, the dissimilarity index for black primary school students was 62.9%. This means that if you were to have black students attend primary schools in numbers comparable to their share of the overall school population, more than 3 in 5 students would need to be reassigned to another school. But by 2011, Tulsa was far from the most segregated school system in the nation. Among the 100 largest metropolitan areas, we ranked as the 47th most segregated, right in the middle of the pack. Overall, in the Tulsa metropolitan area, African American students make up 11.9% of the total public school population. But in 19 schools located in Tulsa County, African American students make up a majority, and in 12 schools, they make up 75% or more of the student population. All of these schools are in the TPS school district. None are in suburban districts. In fact, every school in Tulsa County with at least 21% or more black students in 2011 was a TPS school. Meanwhile, there are 71 schools in Tulsa County where blacks make up 5% or less of the school population. Only 2 of those 71 are TPS. The rest are suburban school districts. There's another measure that is commonly used to convey how segregated a district or geographic area is, known as the exposure or isolation index. What this tells us is for the average child of various races, what's the racial composition of the school he or she attends? In the Tulsa metropolitan area, the exposure index tells us a perhaps somewhat more optimistic story. In 2011, the average black student attended a school that is 38% black, 28% white, 18% Hispanic, 9% Native American, and 5% other. The average white student attended a school that is 59% white and 41% minority. The average Hispanic student attended a school that is 33% Hispanic, and the average Native American student attended a school that is 25% Native American. So we see that our schools are far from fully integrated, but they're not racially monolithic either. One more set of numbers for you to chew on. Across the Tulsa metropolitan area, the poverty rate in public primary schools in 2011 was 63%. That's the percentage of all students who are eligible for the free and reduced school lunch program. For the average white student, the poverty rate of the schools they attended was 55%. For Native American students, it was 63%. For Hispanic students, 77%, and for black students, 81%. In other words, if you're a white student, about 1 in 2 students in the school you attend will be eligible for free and reduced school lunch. If you're a black student, 4 in 5. The fact that most black and Hispanic students in Tulsa are attending schools with high concentrations of disadvantaged low-income students has far-reaching consequences. Low-income students generally come to school less ready to learn. They may be dealing with health issues, with hunger, and with stress that comes from living in households and neighborhoods where crime and violence are prevalent. When classrooms fill with students who come to school less ready to learn, teachers must focus more on discipline and less on learning. Remediation becomes the norm, and teachers have little time to challenge the exceptional students who can overcome personal and family hardships that typically interfere with learning. 2 obstacles to student achievement that are particularly prevalent in high poverty schools are student mobility and student absenteeism. Where you have more students moving in and out of the classroom or missing school days, teachers spend more time repeating lessons and have fewer opportunities to adapt instructions to students' individuals' strengths and weaknesses. In Tulsa County in 2011, in those schools where black students made up 50% or more of the population, the mobility rate was 33%, meaning 1 in 3 students left the school over the course of a year. The average absence rate was 17% in those schools. By comparison, in Tulsa County schools with less than 10% African American students, the mobility rate was just 7%, and the absentee rate was about half of that, of what it was where blacks were majority. Now see, aren't you glad I handed out all those statistics on a piece of paper? Again, this doesn't just affect the particular child who is missing school days or changing schools over the course of a year. Where this is prevalent, it affects all the students in the classroom as teachers struggle to bring students up to speed. In Tulsa, as in the rest of the nation, schools are still segregated by race and by income because neighborhoods and housing are still segregated by race and by income. Earlier, I noted that the school dissimilarity index for blacks in Tulsa was 63%. Well, if you look at the dissimilarity index for neighborhoods at the census tract level in Tulsa metropolitan area, for blacks, it is 57%, about the same. That actually puts Tulsa right around the middle of the pack for the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the nation. But it still means that a majority of black residents of Tulsa would have to relocate for blacks to be spread out across the area in a manner comparable to their share of the overall population. The unfortunate reality is that blacks are overwhelmingly more likely to live in high poverty neighborhoods than are whites. In Tulsa, in 2000, more than half of all blacks, 53.5%, lived in neighborhoods where 20% or more of people live below the federal poverty level. This is 25th highest among the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the nation. Among non-Hispanic whites, just 9% lived in high poverty areas, and for Hispanics it was 25%. And 10% of the black population lives in neighborhoods with poverty rates of over 40%, compared to less than 1% of whites. Research by New York University sociologist Patrick Sharkey found that not only is the likelihood of living in neighborhoods with high concentrations of poverty much greater for blacks, but mobility out of such neighborhoods is much more limited. Considering all black families, 48% had lived in poor neighborhoods for at least 2 generations, compared to only 7% of white families. So black children are much more likely to be raised and attend schools in neighborhoods with high concentrations of poverty and to be stuck in those neighborhoods from generation to generation. We know that in Tulsa, over the past 2 decades, we've seen a notable diffusion of poverty. There are now poor families of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, black, white, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, living throughout the city and out into the suburbs. Poverty is by no means exclusively a black or North Tulsa phenomenon, but the concentration of a community in high poverty neighborhoods remains primarily a problem affecting African Americans. Understanding and explaining why African Americans continue to live in neighborhoods with high concentrations of poverty is a vast and complicated question that cannot be addressed without careful historical investigation. It didn't just happen that black children ended up in racially homogenous schools and neighborhoods. It didn't just happen that blacks ended up in high poverty, disadvantaged, underserved neighborhoods, while whites ended up in middle-class suburbs with good roads and parks and healthcare facilities and grocery stores. When I say it didn't just happen, I mean it didn't just happen temporally, as in recent decades, and as in it didn't just happen by chance or coincidence or magic. The reality is you can't explain why the median white household in this country has 18 to 20 times more accumulated wealth than the median black household without looking at decades and centuries of public policies and private practices that helped one group of citizens accumulate wealth while preventing and destroying the wealth of another group of citizens. The history has involved everything from poll taxes and voter disenfranchisement laws to discriminatory job hiring and college admissions policies to outright violence and destruction, such as the Tulsa race riot, which burned to the ground the businesses and homes of thousands of African Americans. Many of the most far-ranging and destructive pillars of American segregation have been erected in the domains of housing and home ownership. You can't understand why the home ownership rate in Tulsa for blacks is 40% and for whites it is 72% without looking into the long history of discriminatory housing and financial policies that were set in place by government and the private sector alike in the United States. Earlier this year, The Atlantic magazine published a remarkable essay by the brilliant African-American journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates called The Case for Reparations, in which he focused on the myriad forms that housing discrimination took in 20th century America. Let me cite one example. He writes, in 1934, Congress created the Federal Housing Administration. The FHA insured private mortgages, causing a drop in interest rates and a decline in the size of the down payment required to buy a house. But an insured mortgage was not a possibility for African Americans. The FHA had adopted a system of maps that rated neighborhoods according to their perceived stability. On the maps, green areas rated A indicated in-demand neighborhoods that, as one appraiser put it, lacked a single foreigner or Negro. These neighborhoods were considered excellent prospects for insurance. Neighborhoods where black people lived were rated D and were usually considered ineligible for FHA backing. Anyone know what colors those neighborhoods were drawn in? Right, those neighborhoods were colored in red. Neither the percentage of black people living there nor their social class mattered. Black people were viewed as a contagion. Redlining went beyond FHA-backed loans and spread to the entire mortgage industry, which was already rife with racism, excluding black people from most legitimate means of obtaining a mortgage. These discriminatory public housing policies gradually ended in the mid-20th century, but we don't have to look far back in time to find equally insidious patterns of discrimination in the 1980s and 1990s. In the last 2 decades, the subprime mortgage industry emerged to offer loans for home purchases and refinance to individuals with tainted credit. These loans served a purpose, but in many cases they served to strip wealth away from low-income homeowners. In Tulsa, in 2005, near the height of the subprime mortgage boom, 47% of home purchase loans made to African Americans in Tulsa were high interest rate loans, compared to 22% of loans made to whites. Among low-income blacks, 68.5% of refinanced loans in 2005 were high interest rate loans, compared to 44% among low-income whites, a gap of 25 percentage points. When the crash came, blacks were hit hardest. The Urban Institute found that between 2004 and 2010, the average Hispanic family saw its wealth cut by 25%, while African American families saw their wealth fall by 23%. By comparison, the wealth of white families fell by 1%. In Tulsa, the home ownership rate for blacks fell 2 full percentage points between 2000 and 2010, while for whites it remained unchanged. To sum up, it seems to me that we're not going to succeed in addressing problems of poor student performance and failing schools unless and until we honestly confront the long history and continuing manifestations of racial segregation in our city and in our nation. 50 years ago, President Lyndon Baines Johnson said the following: "Negro poverty is not white poverty. Many of its causes and many of its cures are the same, but there are differences, deep, corrosive, obstinate differences, radiating painful roots into the community and into the family and the nature of the individual. These differences are not racial differences. They are solely and simply the consequences of ancient brutality, past injustice, and present prejudice." There are no easy solutions, but I appreciate the willingness of the Dan Allen Center for Social Justice to provide a forum for a necessary conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Once again, we have cards and so forth. Questions from next panelist, Ross White of the
Thank you very much for having me today. Please let me know if I do need to speak up. I've been asked today to really highlight some of the demographic trends and the, thank you. Some of the very changing demographic trends of Tulsa County and the city of Tulsa. As one of the roles that the Community Service Council fills within the community, we are the Census Information Center for the state. So all of the data that I'll be presenting to you tonight is data from the American Community Survey that was collected in 2012. So just to give you a little perspective of where this data was from. I really find it very important to begin with understanding who we are of Tulsa today, so we can kind of do a historical perspective of how far that we have come in various areas. Currently, Tulsa County has over 613,000 individuals. Of that, that breakdown really looks to be about 64% Caucasian non-Hispanics, 11.6% Hispanic and Latinos, 10.8% African American non-Hispanics, 6.7% Native American, and 5.6% identifying as two or more racial groups. So overall, you really see that Tulsa has changed in our demographic makeup. We are not primarily one race, we are growing. And there is a minority-majority shift that is occurring. We're not just Caucasians anymore. We are increasingly becoming a minority population with high increases in those who do identify as two or more races. We already are really seeing that shift occur within our young children. So really looking at that geographic population of where our minorities are, really see that they're not concentrating in one given area any longer. We see that they are fairly dispersed. Although we do see concentrations of individual race groups throughout Tulsa, we are becoming a much more dispersed population throughout Tulsa County and the city of Tulsa. We're really not seeing that mass collection of a specific racial category migrating to either our city centers or to our suburbs. We are seeing that each of these groups are moving and migrating from either a city center or even into that suburb area. So that white flight that we really think to the suburbs is not occurring in the same way that it was traditionally in 1980s and so. So we really see that there is a great misperception of what is happening with our racial breakdown across Tulsa. So in continuing with the tradition of ups and downs, that's one of our things to highlight, is that that's a down. So citizens really do not understand how we are made up across the city of Tulsa. So really kind of highlighting where we have come, starting in the 1960s, moving forward, we've really seen again that migration. And in the 1960s, we really saw that Caucasian individuals were living within a Midtown or North Tulsa area. The 1980s is when we saw that shift where white Caucasian non-Hispanics were moving out of Midtown into that more suburban type setting. And then really between 2000 and 2010 is when we really saw that that dispersion of Caucasian non-Hispanics had happened throughout Tulsa County. African Americans, traditionally into the 1960s, we really saw that they were really in that North Tulsa area, or that Old North that some refer to. But we did see some pocketing of African Americans in West Tulsa, even in the 1960s. But really that pocketing began in the 1980s when we saw that shift to East Tulsa and then into that Broken Arrow range. From 1960 to 2000, there was over a 500% growth of African Americans living in the Broken Arrow area. So it really shows you that it's not just in one area that we're putting all of our racial groups, that we are throughout the Tulsa area. Additionally, in the 1960s, if you were Hispanic in Tulsa, everybody knew you. We really didn't even collect data on it at that point. There were not enough Hispanics to collect that data on. And so we really saw that those that we did have were congregated into that downtown Tulsa area and some into the North Tulsa. In the 1980s is again when we saw that community-wide development happening, and we saw a migration of Hispanics into the East Tulsa area. We've additionally now, as we've moved forward into the 2000 and 2010s, we've seen that East Tulsa has now become primarily that Hispanic population, but Owasso and Collinsville are both areas that we see really substantial increased growth within our Hispanic populations. In the 1960s, again, with the Asian populations, it was very unknown of who was in Tulsa. And then now we are seeing a small band really occur throughout East Tulsa, Broken Arrow, and in the area. And that's not one. Up until recently, we really did not start collecting true data on our Asian populations. That population and growth was really hard to determine for our Asian races. Population growth and the change in each of the racial categories. Again, we've seen that growth within Caucasian occurring within South, Southeast, Owasso, Broken Arrow, and we really have truly seen a loss within North Tulsa and within the Midtown area that we consider here in Tulsa. 1960s, it's very important to note that in Tulsa County, the city of Tulsa, 90% of the residents were Caucasian non-Hispanics. Currently in 2010, only 58% of those residents were Caucasian non-Hispanics. So we really are seeing that, again, it's not simply a Caucasian base. We are growing and becoming more ethnically diverse. For the county of Tulsa, that is really mirrored. It has not just been the city. In 1960, 91% of the residents of the county of Tulsa were Caucasian, and then 50 years later, in 2010, only 65% of those residents of the county of Tulsa were Caucasian non-Hispanics. For African Americans, we've really seen a lot of growth in the area of Broken Arrow and in East Tulsa. And again, I'll highlight that in Broken Arrow, within that 50-year time period, there was a 500% growth in the African American population. In 1990, another really important thing I want to note is that in 1960, 92% of African Americans that lived in Tulsa County lived in North Tulsa. In 2000, only 52% of African Americans in the county lived in North Tulsa. And in 2010, at the last point that this data was collected, only 43% of African Americans in Tulsa County live in Tulsa County, in North Tulsa, excuse me. So that really shows you that the migration and the shift of our populations, that we are not seeing those heavily pocketed areas of African Americans in North Tulsa. They are dispersing throughout the county. To really just highlight quickly the Hispanics and the Latinos, again, there were almost zero in the 1960s when that data began to be collected. And then through 2000, we saw an 82% increase in the number of Hispanic and Latino individuals within Tulsa County. So it really goes to show, and to Dr. Black's point, that the racial issues have become more of an educational and an income issue. We see people pocketing in certain areas because that is where they can afford housing at. That is where they can find transportation to and from employment. They're staying closer to child care centers because they do not have that transportation or reliable housing that they are able to count on a daily basis. So we really have seen that racial segregation has now moved more of an income segregation issue throughout Tulsa. In closing, I'd just like to highlight a few things about the Tulsa County School. And not highlighting any one school in particular, but we really have seen some changing racial and ethnic balances. We're really looking, our schools, the composition of our schools, they match the racial composition of our districts. And then from 2007 to 2013, really noticed a growth in the Hispanic and the Asian populations. In 2007, there were 12.2% Hispanics enrolled in Tulsa County School. In just six short years, that was increased to 18% of our Hispanic population. So as we, again, are becoming more of a racial and ethnically diverse community, we see those pockets in every area of our Tulsa County School. Again, we have seen that increase within our Asian population, but there has been a decrease in both our African American and our Caucasian enrollment in school. In 2007, 54.9% of those enrolled in Tulsa County School were Caucasian non-Hispanics. Currently, only 47.8% are Caucasian non-Hispanics. So we've really even seen that shift and that downturn in Caucasians, non-Hispanics. Additionally, the African American population is decreasing within our enrollment numbers throughout Tulsa County. In 2007, we saw 16.9% of our population enrolled as African American non-Hispanics, and now currently we're at 14% of our African Americans of that school district breakdown. So again, it's showing that we are growing in certain areas, but we are shrinking in others. Real problem, though, is that we have not addressed the social supports needed to address that minority-majority shift. We see issues of social isolation, where we have pockets of individual race groups with very limited resources, whether it be transportation or food. We really see that that is still occurring regardless of that the majority-minority shift. Cultural competence is something that we are still continuing to struggle with. We need to be able to put supports into place for teachers to have a higher level of competency to assist with the culturally diverse student population that they are serving. There are additional supports that need to be put into place for English language learners. We really noticed that it is not just the Hispanic populations that, again, are growing. We've seen that rise in Asian populations, so that they are not just simply a Hispanic issue that we need to address. There are individual culture and ethnic issues that are still currently underfunded, where we do not have individuals with to put that supports around those very specific issues related to the unique racial backgrounds that we are serving throughout Tulsa County. So in closing, I'll kind of give my ups and downs to keep with tradition. And some of the two ups that I've really identified that we are not significantly segregated by race, but more of a geographic area. There has been a minority-majority population shift that has resulted in pockets that we see the power of big numbers playing out. It is not simply a North or an East Tulsa issue now. It is an outlying issue for our suburban areas and our city central. The second up that I'd like to highlight is that our children are now in a more racially and ethnically diverse population. They're not isolated due to issues of segregation. The two downs that I would like to highlight are the people's perceptions of what our geography truly looks like are skewed. We don't understand what our population looks like and better understand how segregation has improved throughout the Tulsa area. We really need to understand where we are today, and that our racial composition of our school and that balance that we seek to achieve, we really do need to address that changing demographic throughout Tulsa County. And then the second, and in closing, the final down would be that our educational policies do not reflect the need of our current districts in this minority-majority shift of our population. Thank you.